you're one of the few guys who could answer this. If this was a traditional sport, I might be asking, hey, would you have rather been named, league MVP or played in the finals? And in your circumstance or situation, I can ask, we've all heard some guys say, oh, the belt's a prop, but I struggle with that because I do know that forever and ever after that, anything you ever do in life, you can always be billed as the WWE champion. Whether that's autograph circuits or public appearances or whatever, it does have some marketing value. And I get that, no, technically he didn't really win the match. I get that. But I'm just saying, if we set all that aside for a minute, I want you to compare and contrast what felt bigger and what felt more real. Winning the world title in WWE or main eventing WrestleMania?
Main event in WrestleMania. Because by then it had time to sink in. We were in Norfolk when I won the world title. And I remember I went out. It's a pretty cool story. I went out with my wife afterwards and just to have a couple drinks, and there was nobody there. I don't know if the guys were going to a different TV or something. We stayed because she was flying back the next day and I was going to probably drive by myself or something to the next TV. I don't remember why we were about the only ones there. And some fan came up and asked for a picture and my wife took it. And about 20 years later, this was recently, that same fan came up to me and said, hey, would you sign this picture? And I looked at it. I said, oh, my God, that was in the bar. I said, because there was very few people. I mean, there's literally like only 3 or 4 people in the whole bar. Just me and my wife just, there, just listening to some music, having some drinks. And he goes, I'm the one that took a picture with you. Your wife took it. I said, holy cow, that's great. But I don't know if it had sunk in yet. After you hold it for that, a long time, you realize, the importance of it. And the importance of what comes next. And that is that I've got to do everything I can to put all my equity into this title belt so that I can give it to somebody. And that equity transfers to that person. And so I knew how important my role was at that point. Before that, you're getting something. And I don't think that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. It's a prop. It's like saying, oh, I'm a CEO. Oh, that name is just a prop. No, it's not. It means you run the company. When you got that title, it means you're the man. You get paid a lot more. If it's just a prop, then explain to me the difference in salaries, because I've had the title and I've not had the title, and it is a significant difference in what you get paid and also how you're treated. But I think losing the title and not necessarily losing the title, but main eventing that WrestleMania and knowing how important it was that I did my role well, because I had to give that to John Cena. And not that he needed it. He was going to do it anyway. But that was my role. And so I think it was more cool to headline WrestleMania, because I knew going into it, this is the biggest show they have. This is the biggest match they have. And it's all not on me, but a lot of it's on me to give as much as I can to John.
I find it fascinating because we always talk about, or we used to talk about, guys like Peyton Manning before he won the Super Bowl. And we'd say, hey, he's the MVP and he's the best quarterback, but he'll never win the big one. And before that, they said that about Dan Marino. In wrestling, we would say things like, hey, who's the greatest, to never hold the world title? And a guy like Ted DiBiase would come up because he was never world champion. But in storyline, he was for a few days when he bought the belt from Andre, but you get where I'm going.
Yep.
But he did work in the main event of a WrestleMania, but unfortunately for him, it was a tournament format. Now, he was a central figure in there, but it's not like, we knew that he was going to be in the main event. I guess you knew, but it wasn't marketed that way on the poster. And I just find it interesting that when, we're even celebrating a guy like Ric Flair, who won 16 world championships, he never really main evented a WrestleMania. Yes, he had WrestleMania title matches, but he didn't go on last. And I think that is probably the right answer, John, that you gave, that most wrestlers, if they were given their pick, hey, you could be the world champion or you could main event WrestleMania. No disrespect, you and I both think a lot of him. Jinder Mahal was the world champion. The main event spot at WrestleMania eluded him, and it's eluded CM Punk so far, but he's going to main event this coming Saturday. And I want to ask you about that. That's one of the biggest talking points going into this. Does Saturday night count as a WrestleMania main event, at least to you, John?
It does. Yes, it does. I think the guy who's closing the show on Sunday is probably the bigger main event, if you want to call it that. But yeah, they're two different shows. And so, yes, I'm not going to split hairs about this and say it's not a main event. It is a main event. They're calling it a main event. We've had double main events before, and I have no issue with that. I think it's the main event. not a doubt in my mind. You know, for whatever, you know, the show that's being closed on Sunday, people may hold that match a little bit higher. I don't know, but it is certainly. But if you main event in your house, if you main event Armageddon, if you main event a pay-per-view, you main evented the pay-per-view. It's WrestleMania, and you've main evented it. So CM Punk is main eventing WrestleMania. In my opinion, not a doubt in my mind. And I think it's wonderful for him. And I have a feeling he's really going to love this. There's nothing like main event in WrestleMania, man. It's just, God almighty, man. That's the biggest. You work toward that all year. Everything you do all year works toward that show. And so you want to be in the big match. And to be in that's pretty cool.
Everybody's talking about the WrestleMania 9 documentary that was posted on Peacock over the weekend. Have you had a chance to catch any of that yet, John?
No.
Well, there's some fun behind-the-scenes footage that I think you'll like. They talk about scaling the buildings and ticketing, and there's a lot of never-before-seen footage. And, of course, our buddy Bruce Prichard is one of the talking heads, so I think you'll dig it. But one of the things that I really enjoyed seeing was a conversation that maybe we wouldn't have imagined would have been recorded, but Vince McMahon was talking to a young Shawn Michaels. Shawn, of course, was going to kick off that show at WrestleMania. He was going to wrestle Tatanka. He's the Intercontinental Champion. That's WrestleMania 9. We know the next year in Madison Square Garden, he's going to steal the show with the ladder match. He's going to have a title match at WrestleMania 11, and the boyhood dream comes true at WrestleMania 12. So this is really the start of his big singles run. And to see Vince sort of giving him the advice ahead of time of, have you wrestled in the daytime? Have you wrestled outdoors during the daytime before, Shawn? Well, it's a little different. The sound goes up to the heavens. I just thought all of that, as you know, he's sort of explaining that to a young Shawn Michaels. I kind of forget. I think most fans forget that, hey, even Shawn Michaels was a young guy sometime, and he had his first outdoor, because we all just assume, well, he was born Yoda, and he just walks around and knows everything about wrestling. But to see that moment between Vince and Shawn was pretty cool. You know, you've wrestled in a lot of WrestleManias, indoors and outdoors. Do you have a preference?
Yeah, for sound, it's indoors. There's no doubt about it. I remember when Steve had Kevin Owens in that match, and I don't know if I can't remember. That was an outdoor arena, wasn't it? It was a huge arena, whatever it was. And
Dallas a couple of years ago, it was indoors, but it was the stadium for Dallas.
It was a stadium, and the problem is in stadiums you can't always. You don't always hear the crowd on you like a basketball arena. You know, basketball arena is built with the crowd right on top of you. And especially when you add all the chairs in the back, but a huge arena, sometimes the sound goes up and you've got these cavernous, ceilings in these things, whether they're open or not, you lose a lot of that sound because it goes up. And same as outdoors. Outdoors, they can be incredibly loud. If you're in the ring, sometimes you don't know what they're doing. It's disconcerting. You know, so that's why Vince is explaining this to Shawn about the reaction that you're going to get out there. And I remember Steve, I said, man, Steve, that was awesome. Because I thought it was. I thought he did a great job with Kevin. I didn't know Steve, by the way, I didn't know Steve had not been preparing for this match. I thought he'd been working out for like 6 months. I saw him practicing back there. That was like the first time he'd been in the ring in years. So he basically just showed up and did a match is what he did, which is, I love it. You know, not like Steve needs practice, but you think you just need to go through it, you know, just for your own self. You know, he did a wonderful job. And I said, it was great. He goes, I couldn't hear the crowd that well. I said, Steve, they were smoking. And I said, wait till you hear it played back. And, you know, which I'm sure that, you know, he watched it back and could tell. But sometimes when you're out there, you can't tell. You can't tell how loud they are. You don't, and if you can't tell how loud they are, you can't tell what they're into. And that's really tough when you're out there and you're calling the match on the fly, like I'm sure Shawn was doing, and like Steve was doing. And so that's why it's so important what Vince went through to him, that it's a complete different dynamic.